Sizzler. It's an appropriate name for a steakhouse. It makes you think of that sizzling sound when the steak is cooking. It's a pleasant sound. Well, it used to be one of the most recognizable names in the restaurant industry and was briefly considered to be the largest chain of steakhouses in the United States. The ownership of this company has been all over the place, complicating the timeline and making it difficult to provide a full financial picture, but I can say confidently that their peak years were in the early 1990s when there were over 600 locations, mostly near their home state of California, but still found throughout most of the country, generating almost $1 billion in system-wide sales. Compare that to today, when Sizzler is estimated to have fewer than 100 locations with system-wide sales of around 200 million, less than a quarter of their previous size, and I don't even know if that expresses the extent of their struggles. In 1996, it was a big news story when they filed for bankruptcy. They came back from it the following year with big plans of revitalizing the brand and returning to profitability that did have some fluctuating success, but overall, the trend has continued downward. In 2020, they filed for bankruptcy for a second time. Obviously, the pandemic had complicated things there, but even their president admitted that they were struggling before it. Honestly, whenever I hear the name Sizzler, I always think of that one guy from the movie White Men Can't Jump. We go with Sizzler. By the way, that movie takes place in California and was released in 1992, so a very logical reference to put in it that I think further proves their popularity at the time. In this video, I want to tell the story of Sizzler while outlining what I believe to be 5 of the biggest reasons behind their decline. In 1958, a man named Del Johnson teamed up with his wife Helen to open the very first Sizzler Family Steakhouse, as he called it, in Culver City, California. It stood out from most others at the time in that it offered an abnormally cheap steak dinner. It was priced at a little more than $1, which even way back then was almost unheard of. I have to respect it for being somewhat pioneering in that it found that underserved sweet spot between fast food and casual dining. Today we would call it fast casual, but I believe there wasn't really a name for it back then. Such a standout concept quickly attracted a lot of customers, as you might expect. To expand the business, Del Johnson was also pioneering in the practice of franchising. Within a decade, there were 160 franchise Sizzlers and only 4 that were owned by the company, and Del and Helen felt that it was an appropriate time to retire and sell the business. The buyer of it was a friend of theirs named Jim Collins. He had bought it for less than $1 million, and under his ownership, Sizzler became a national brand. It's going to lead me right into the first reason behind their decline: overextending. I know it's almost upsetting to see this on yet another list, but here we are. For over 30 years, it was mostly smooth sailing for Sizzler. For many families, it was an attractive, beloved place to get an affordable steak dinner, not to mention the seafood, the cheese toast, and maybe the most important part, the salad bar. I promise you that there's a generation of people out there right now that have fond memories around that salad bar. Let me know if you're one of those people. They introduced it toward the end of the 1970s, and it played a big part in taking things to that next level throughout the 1980s, almost quadrupling in sales over that time. In 1985, they bought a 100 steakhouse chain called Rustler on the East Coast, and that helped Sizzler establish themselves on the other side of the country. They also started opening restaurants internationally, where specifically it became popular in Australia, peaking at, I believe, almost 100 locations that have since all shut down. I mean, there was such a high demand for new Sizzler restaurants across the country that they were having trouble keeping up with it. I'm sure that I do not have to tell you that rushing to open so many locations can have potential downsides. In this case, many of them were in less than ideal areas, often too close to an existing Sizzler. They were agreeing to longer leases with higher payments just to get the ball rolling, overall making some risky moves that were betting on the fact that the demand for their food would remain strong. Yeah, I'm sure everyone could see where this is heading, so I'm going to move on to the next reason on my list: their buffet concept. Remember, the famous Sizzler salad bar had become an outrageously successful addition to their restaurant, so in 1991, I'm sure they thought that a logical step from there would be to build upon it by extending it into a full-on buffet. So now customers can choose whether they wanted a traditional entree or access to the buffet. They even advertised it with such a dramatic commercial that basically tied it in with America being the land of freedom and choices.
Sizzler is the choice of America.
It was so many choices that some of the customers became overwhelmed or even confused by the whole thing, but I'm thinking that most of them were at least somewhat excited about it. Part of the bigger issue was that most of those buildings were not designed to support a full-on buffet as far as the equipment in the kitchen or the size of the dining area. Adding in that buffet section meant that there was less space for people to eat, and they were not able to accommodate as many customers. Also, I have to think that at least part of their motivation to make this transition was the recent success of other buffet chains. It was looking like a promising format for a while, but unfortunately, that is going to lead me into the next reason on my list: competition. In the 1990s, competition became intense in just about every segment that Sizzler was trying to operate. Buffets were bigger than ever, new national steakhouse chains were emerging, and fast casual concepts were quickly gaining momentum. All of it was bad news for Sizzler, because in all of these ways that they used to stand out, they were now getting lost in the shuffle, or if not intentionally passed over in favor of these new, exciting options. Sales consistently fell throughout the second half of the decade because the potential customers were being split in more directions, and the demand for Sizzler was not nearly as high as it used to be. But remember, they had rushed to open all of these new restaurants, and with sales falling, they couldn't afford to keep up with all of these expensive lease agreements. They had to borrow money to continue operating. That quickly ballooned to almost $100 million, so then they couldn't afford to keep up with their debt payments, and that pushed them into bankruptcy. My goodness, some of the reasons as to why they were so quickly surpassed by the competition tie into the remaining reasons on my list, the next one of them being the fact that Sizzler has sadly become out of date. I can't imagine there's anyone out there that would dispute this either, because there are so many ways you can look at this. Following the bankruptcy, Sizzler started phasing out that buffet, completely eliminating it from many of their locations in favor of emphasizing some higher quality menu options that they were providing, but buffets did remain a big part of things, and I'm sure you have noticed that buffets have not been doing too well over the past few decades. I'm not going to go too far into any of that right now because I have covered the decline of multiple buffet chains on this channel before, so I recommend those if you want to hear more about the specifics there. Also, it is a steakhouse, and considering how dietary preferences have changed over the years, Sizzler may have done better if it had specialized in something like chicken. But maybe the biggest factor in being out of date is that Sizzler is simply an old brand. It is older than most other comparable restaurants. I mean, there were concerns in the 1970s that Sizzler was becoming outdated. I even think that the transition to the buffet was partially motivated by a desire to update their formats. A huge part of their newest marketing efforts involves tapping into people's nostalgia for the restaurant and reminding them of the good old days of eating there with their families, rather than creating something more modern that attempts to attract a new group of customers. One of these commercials features actress Jodie Sweetin, most known for being on the show Full House. She actually started her career in a Sizzler commercial when they were near their peak in 1987, so the new commercial references the old commercial and features a lot of self-aware humor. The part that stands out to me is when she says, "Sizzler is many things, but most importantly, still open." Now that can't be good if you have to remind everybody that you're still open. They have also expressed plans to bring back an old mascot that I don't even remember seeing before. I guess he was used most heavily in the 1960s. I should point out that they have been working towards some overdue remodeling of the restaurants and have a few menu changes planned, like hot wings and more desserts. Their chief growth officer has expressed that it is a growing, profitable business, and they feel pretty good about where they are right now. I know that all sounds promising, but to me, it's just hard to see much promise here. Sizzler has continued to close more restaurants and hasn't given much reason to believe that they'll ever be able to return even close to those previous highs. My point here is that nobody thinks of Sizzler as a cool or exciting brand anymore. They have not kept up with the times, it has had a negative impact on the business, and I think that makes it unlikely for them to come back in any major way without any major changes. For my final reason behind the decline of Sizzler, I'm going to have to say that they have a negative reputation. I know it seems like I'm really starting to pile on here, but at this point, despite various efforts to combat it, Sizzler has held on to a reputation of being a cheap, low-tier dining option. In 1993, their reputation was hurt by an E. coli outbreak linked to 4 Sizzler restaurants in Oregon and Washington. In total, almost 100 people were made sick by it, 15 of which were hospitalized. Something like that can, I think understandably, make people really apprehensive about eating there. I know I would have some second guesses about it. And as if that wasn't enough, it happened again 7 years later. That time it was only linked to 2 Sizzlers in the Milwaukee area, but it arguably received more press because a 3-year-old girl ended up dying from it. It eventually led to a $13 million settlement paid by the supplier of the meat and the franchisee of those particular restaurants, again making the public public apprehensive about eating at Sizzler. In 2006, I also want to mention that there was rat poison found in the food at 2 Sizzlers in Australia that appears to have been put there by a customer who had issues with mental health. It caused all of the Sizzler salad bars in the country to be shut down for a while, and they were also criticized with how long it took them to report that incident. To be clear, I'm not trying to convey that Sizzler is an out-of-date, low-quality, dangerous place to eat, but that is how they are often perceived, and we can see where people have developed that perception. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Sizzler? Have you been there before, and what was your perception of it? Did you like it better many years ago, or do you agree with Jodie Sweetin when she says that it is still as good as ever?
It's still as good as ever.
Also, have I effectively put together a picture of what happened to them, or do you think that there are still more important elements to it? It is a wide topic that ranges over 60 years, so there is plenty of stuff not covered in this video. I did my best to simplify it into what I felt was the most relevant and interesting parts. Finally, do you see positive things for the future of Sizzler, or what do you think they have to do to rebuild and win people back over? And any other thoughts you have about Sizzler or anything else in this video, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say.